what if the existence of hell isn't, a theological threat, but a strict mathematical necessity?
Oh, I mean, it is a massive paradigm shift.
Right. Like, what if proving it doesn't require an ancient scripture or a fiery sermon or even blind faith? What if it's literally just an algebra equation?
You're taking something deeply ethereal,
Hmm.
historically shrouded in all this mysticism and fear, and you're trying to anchor it in the rigidly structural.
Yeah.
You're completely removing the ambiguity of belief and replacing it with, well, the mechanics of a formula.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a truly thought-provoking essay by a writer named Su Feng. This was written in 2022 and translated by Kinyu. It's titled Eight Logical Deductions That Prove the Existence of Hell.
Quite the title.
Right, and instead of starting with angels or demons, Xu Feng starts with an incredibly bold baseline statement right out of the gate. He argues that asking if hell exists is the exact same thing as asking if the soul exists.
Wow.
Yeah, according to his framework, you simply cannot separate the two.
Now, before we delve into the mechanics of how he actually builds this argument, it's crucial to set some ground rules for you, the listener.
Good point.
In this deep dive, we are embarking on a strictly impartial exploration of a highly specific philosophical and spiritual framework.
Exactly.
We are not endorsing these religious or spiritual viewpoints, nor are we taking any sides on the actual literal existence of heaven or hell. Our mission here is solely to unpack the fascinating logical architecture that Su Feng has built in this source material.
We're just looking at the blueprints.
Right. We're attempting to understand how one pillar of logic supports the next.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand that architecture, we have to start exactly where the author starts. And surprisingly, we aren't opening a religious text.
No, we are not.
We are opening a physics textbook. The foundation of this entire argument begins with the law of zero-sum energy.
Which is, a fundamental concept in physics. The idea that the total energy of an isolated system remains constant.
Like action and reaction.
Exactly. He really leans into that idea. For every action force, there is a reaction of force that is equal in magnitude and opposite in direction. The positive and negative must ultimately equal zero to maintain equilibrium.
So he is taking Newton's third law and just trying to apply it directly to metaphysics.
He is.
That is a massive conceptual leap. I mean, how does he justify making a rigid physics equation responsible for spiritual realms?
Well, he argues that the universe's energies, both physical and spiritual, they aren't operating on different rule books.
Oh, interesting.
Right. If you regard the action force as positive energy and the reaction force as negative energy, they have to cancel each other out perfectly. I mean, 1 plus -1 equals 0.
Right.
So Effing makes the leap by stating that heaven represents that localized accumulation of positive energy. Therefore, hell must inherently exist as the corresponding negative energy.
So it's just basic math to him.
Exactly. Interestingly, he notes that the labels are entirely arbitrary. Like you could flip it and say heaven is negative and hell is positive.
Oh, sure.
But the core mechanical principle remains. If there is no hell, the universe actually violates its own law of zero-sum energy.
The grand equation remains unbalanced.
Right, which physics dictates is impossible.
So he takes that concept of physical balance and pushes it directly into pure mathematics, which he describes as the language of the universe.
The universal code.
Yeah. He asks us to visualize a three-dimensional coordinate system, so mapping 3D space with positive and negative axes extending outward from a central origin point.
It's the standard way we understand spatial dimensions, right? Length, width, and depth.
Right, the XYZ axis.
In this system, there is a positive quadrant where all coordinates are positive, and symmetrically opposed to it, a negative quadrant where all coordinates are negative.
Okay, so Shuveng points out that if heaven occupies the positive quadrant of this universal graph, then because the coordinate system extends infinitely and symmetrically in all directions, there inherently must be a negative quadrant.
And that, he argues, is where hell occupies space.
Okay, but wait, I have to push back on this premise.
Go for it.
It's a neat analogy, like a cosmic accounting ledger, right? But math is largely a descriptive system we invented to understand reality. It's descriptive, not prescriptive.
I see where you're going.
Like, just because we can plot a negative spatial coordinate on a piece of paper, does that definitively mandate that a literal physical realm of suffering must occupy that space?
See, that is the pivotal question when evaluating his framework. To follow Suefeng's logic, we have to accept his foundational premise about the nature of mathematics itself.
Which is what?
He's arguing that mathematical principles and spiritual realities are not separate domains. Math isn't just a human invention used to describe the world. It is the structural scaffolding of reality itself.
The code of the matrix.
Yes.
Yeah.
Therefore, if the math demands absolute symmetry to function, the spiritual universe is bound by that same law and must oblige.
Wow. So the math forces the reality into existence rather than the reality just happening to fit the math. Okay, that structural scaffolding idea naturally bleeds into the next evolution of his argument, which moves away from Western mathematics and leans heavily into ancient Eastern philosophies of dualism.
Which is where it really opens up.
Yeah, because the concept of absolute symmetry doesn't just apply to an x and y axis. He says it applies to the principle of taiji.
What's fascinating here is that taiji dictates that everything has an opposite side, which Schwem terms a virtual interface.
A virtual interface.
Yeah, it implies a necessary boundary where two opposites meet, define each other, and essentially create each other.
Okay, let's repack that virtual interface thing because it is a dense term. If we look at this through the lens of physics again, think about a standard bar magnet.
Okay.
You have a North Pole and a South Pole. The virtual interface is like the equator in the middle.
Right.
You literally cannot slice that magnet in half to isolate just the North Pole. The millisecond you cut it, the universe instantly manifests a new South Pole on the broken half.
Because it has to.
Exactly. The existence of one pole mathematically and physically necessitates the creation of the other. Like a coin, you can't manufacture a coin with a heads that doesn't implicitly create a tails.
That is a much more accurate way to visualize his argument than a simple coin, honestly. The magnet analogy works because the tension is active.
Active tension, right.
If one side goes up, the other side inherently must go down. If one side is light, the other must be darkness. Therefore, if one side of this universal interface is heaven, the other side is inextricably bound to be hell.
Man. And he deepens this by bringing in the concept of yin and yang, but he describes it in a way that feels much more mechanical than mystical.
He does.
He quotes a text stating, "Yin and yang are the way of heaven and earth, the order of all things, the parents of change, the origin of life and death, and the palace of gods."
The phrase parents of change is the crucial mechanism there.
How so? Well, what happens to a universe without the tension of opposites?
It just sits there.
It's completely static. Nothing moves, nothing evolves. Time essentially stops. Change, and therefore life itself, requires the dynamic tension between yin and yang.
They must be balanced to generate the energy of existence.
Exactly.
Okay, so Schwiffing applies this by stating there is a material world and a non-material world. He categorizes heaven as yang, representing the positive, perhaps more active or material spiritual state.
Right.
Therefore, there must be a yin as its symmetrical balance, a non-material counterpart to absorb the opposing energy. In his logic, that yin is hell.
So we have physics, mathematics, the virtual interface of taiji, and the dynamic tension of yin and yang all converging on a singular point. An isolated positive cannot exist without an equal negative.
Okay, but if the universe enforces this mathematical and philosophical symmetry on a cosmic scale, how does it handle human life?
Ah, right.
Because up until now, we've talked about abstract energy, but how does this translate to human actions and morality? He bridges that gap by introducing the law of debt balance. This is where he transitions from cosmic physics to legal theory and universal justice.
True.
He quotes a visceral, fundamental legal principle. A murderer must repay with his life, just like a borrower with money.
It is the ultimate concept of an eye for an eye, a karmic ledger that absolutely must be settled.
His argument here hinges entirely on the structural necessity of justice. If this fundamental ledger does not balance, then justice is an illusion.
Right.
He asks the reader to consider a person who commits massive, horrific acts of evil, accumulating countless debts of suffering against others, and then simply dies without ever facing consequence.
Just escapes it completely.
Exactly. If they die without paying, and there's no mechanism for punishment after death, the universal equation remains permanently unbalanced.
And we established earlier that physics won't allow that.
Precisely.
He actually links this unresolved debt to earthly circumstances, too, which is wild. He asks why some people are born into incredibly affluent, peaceful families, while others are born into devastating poverty and hardship.
You have a generational debt.
Yeah. He suggests this extreme inequality is the universe actively balancing previous debts across lifetimes. But for the ultimate defaulters, like the extreme evildoers who break the scale entirely, the mechanism of punishment cannot just be a slightly harder next life.
Right.
The mechanism has to be hell.
Which brings us to perhaps his most harrowing evidence. He calls it enlightenment from phenomena and reality.
Oh boy.
Rather than relying purely on theoretical equations, he points to real-world documented suffering to prove that the raw material of hell is already interacting with our world.
Right, he gets incredibly specific here. He points to the case of the girl in chains in Feng County, Zuzu. For context, this was a real, deeply disturbing, widely publicized case of human trafficking and horrific long-term abuse. And Sue Feng asks, under the exact same sunshine that we all share, why are people's living conditions so radically, brutally different? He challenges the reader, asking, don't you admit she is experiencing hell?
He reinforces this with a historical example, too, a figure named Wu Zixu, who was fleeing for his life and experienced such intense, sustained psychological terror while trying to pass a border checkpoint that his hair was said to have turned white overnight.
Right.
So Wefeng asks, isn't that absolute, mind-shattering terror exactly what it is like to be in hell?
Okay, wait. This is where the logic feels like it fractures for me.
How so?
He is using literal earthly trauma, trafficked women's abuse, or a historical figure's severe panic attack as proof of an afterlife dimension. Aren't those just examples of a living hell on earth?
I see what you mean.
Like, we use hell as a metaphor to describe horrific human experiences. How does pointing to an earthly experience of trauma structurally prove the existence of a literal, separate afterlife destination?
This raises an important question, and it's exactly where you have to look at how Shuofeng blurs the boundary between the physical and the spiritual.
Okay.
In his framework, earthly suffering and cosmic punishment are not separate phenomena. He isn't saying Wu Zixu's panic is just a poetic metaphor for hell.
Oh, he's not.
No. He is suggesting that extreme earthly anguish is a localized, temporary manifestation of the greater absolute concept of hell.
So he is saying the energy of hell, that negative quadrant we established earlier, can actively bleed into our physical reality.
Precisely. If the purest form of that negative energy can manifest so tangibly and horrifically in a localized human experience, it implies the existence of a concentrated source of that energy.
It's like finding a patch of highly concentrated salt water in a marshy estuary.
Yes.
You don't assume the marsh just spontaneously generated the salt. You use the localized presence of that salt water to logically deduce that a massive, pure ocean must exist somewhere further out, pushing the tides in.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize the argument. The micro-manifestation proves the existence of the macro source. The earthly suffering is the undeniable evidence that the flavor of hell is a real, active variable in the universal ecosystem.
Okay, which perfectly sets up the final evolution of his argument. We've moved from the math classroom to ancient philosophy, down to the grim reality of human justice. Now we have to zoom all the way out to the overarching systems that govern every single entity in existence.
Right, the macro view.
How does the universe actually manage all of this positive and negative energy?
Well, he introduces the concept of the impartiality of the Tao. Shuofeng synthesizes several major spiritual traditions here. He points out that the Bible talks about the Word or the Way, the Tao Te Ching centers entirely on the Tao, and Buddhist scriptures discuss the Dharma.
Right.
He strips away the religious dogma of these texts and ties them together to point at a singular underlying mechanical system.
He treats the Tao not as a judging deity, but as an impartial mechanism. It plays no favorites. The logic is chillingly simple. Perfect people, those who accumulate positive energy and walk the way of the greatest creator, naturally funnel into heaven. Flawed people, those who accumulate negative energy and walk the devil's way, naturally funnel into hell.
It is a rigid, gravity-like mechanism of reward and punishment.
Bah.
His deduction is that without heaven, a perfect person is arbitrarily denied the environment their energy demands.
Right.
And without hell, a flawed person evades the environment their negative energy requires.
Oh.
Without that absolute mechanical certainty of reward and punishment, fairness and therefore universal balance cannot exist.
The ledger must balance, otherwise the system collapses.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He brings in his final and perhaps most fascinating architectural pillar, the law of ecological balance. He takes this abstract spiritual sorting mechanism and applies the rigid laws of biology to it.
Biology, yeah. He asks us to observe nature. In the physical world, a vibrant cycle requires an incredible diversity of elements. You need sunlight, soil, and water. But you also need apex predators, prey, scavengers, and microscopic fungi. If you remove even one of these components, the cycle collapses.
Okay, if we look at this through the lens of a biological trophic cascade, it makes perfect sense. Think about an old growth forest.
Okay, paint the picture.
We love to focus on the towering trees, the sunlight, and the beautiful birds. You could easily compare those to heaven and angels, but for that forest to survive, it absolutely requires the dark, damp, rotting forest floor.
Uh,
It requires decomposers, maggots, and fungi to break down dead matter. If you remove the things that process the decay, the darker, less glamorous parts of the system, the dead matter piles up, the soil loses its nutrients, and the entire forest suffocates and dies.
wow.
Those decomposers biologically and mathematically require a specific dark habitat to exist and do their work.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Soithak is applying that exact biological necessity to the spiritual universe. He argues there is a vast spiritual taxonomy, a massive ecosystem that includes the greatest creator, gods, angels, Buddhas, mortals, all the way down to demons, goblins, monsters, and ghosts.
Wait, so instead of just reading that as a list of mythical creatures, he is viewing them as functional organisms within a spiritual ecosystem.
Yeah,
They are the apex predators, the prey, and the decomposers of universal energy.
exactly. Just as a specific fungus requires a damp, dark biological niche to break down physical rot, a demon or a ghost requires a specific spiritual niche to process spiritual decay,
Oh, man.
and his conclusion is inevitable. If these entities exist to process the negative energy of the universe, where do they live? They cannot survive in the positive quadrant of heaven. They require a habitat tailored to their ecological function.
That habitat is hell. He views the spiritual universe not as some misty, unknowable mystery, but as a rigid, highly organized trophic cascade where every single entity serves a functional ecological purpose, just to keep the universe from choking on its own unresolved energy.
He has synthesized seemingly disparate fields, the physics of zero-sum energy, the mathematical symmetry of a 3D graph, the philosophy of yin and yang, the legal demand for balanced debts, and the biological necessity of an ecosystem, all to build a singular, unified logical framework.
So what does this all mean? It has been an incredible journey through Sufang's mind. And again, while this deep dive remains entirely impartial regarding the actual literal existence of these realms, the logical architecture he built is undeniably fascinating.
It really is.
He forces you to look at the concept of the afterlife not just as a matter of blind faith, but as a potential structural necessity. It changes the question from, do you believe in hell, to, can the math of the universe function without it?
It does, and it leaves us with something profound to consider. I want to address you, the listener, directly with a final thought to mull over. We began this entire deep dive with Swifen's opening premise, that asking if hell exists is exactly the same as asking if the soul exists. Throughout this architecture, he relied heavily on the absolute law of symmetry, the idea that positive one demands negative one,
Right.
that a north pole demands a south pole, that yang demands yin. If the entire underlying structure of the universe demands perfect opposites to function, does that imply that the human soul itself must have an equally powerful symmetrical opposite?
Whoa. If the soul is the positive energy we carry, what is the negative?
Exactly. What would the anti-soul look like in this perfectly balanced mathematical universe? Are we carrying both the North and South Pole within us at all times?
That's intense.
It's a natural extension of Schwiffing's logic, and it takes that comfortable, ethereal idea of the soul we started with and throws it right back into the demanding, symmetrical machinery of the cosmos.